Good evening and welcome to tonight's Provost Series event. I am Susan Sherman, Senior Director of the TC Fund at Teachers College, and I'm thrilled to see so many people here for our program this evening. And I'd also like to say hello to all of our guests joining us tonight for our live stream. I hope you enjoy tonight's program. The Provost Series was designed to give TC Fund donors and alumni the opportunity to have an in-depth look at the game-changing work happening at TC today, work that is supported by your contributions to the TC Fund. A lot of people ask me, what is the TC Fund? What does it do? Why does it matter? And what does it support at an institution like Teachers College? The TC Fund raises more than $2 million each year from thousands of alumni and friends, and it touches everything that happens at the college. It underwrites faculty research. It helps to maintain our classrooms and facilities, and most importantly, the TC Fund supports student financial aid, the top funding priority of TC's campaign, Where the Future Comes First. TC students come from nearly 50 states and over 77 countries around the world to learn at this great institution and to pursue degrees from over 100 academic programs. And we know that they come to Teachers College because they share TC's commitment to social justice and our desire to find answers to society's seemingly intractable problems. For more than a century, Teachers College has championed social issues while our students then go on to become professionals who lead our society in bold new directions. Since 2006, TC has nearly quadrupled total institutional financial aid to our students, and the alumni and friends who donate to the TC Fund every year have been a part of this success every single step of the way. But there's much more that we can do to support our students. Every single dollar given to the TC Fund makes a difference for our students. It allows them to work with the greatest minds in their fields, and then it empowers them to go out and work in the communities where TC's expertise and knowledge is most greatly needed. TC has 90,000 alumni living around the world. If every single alumnus gave $100 to the TC Fund, that would result in $9 million in support of our students who will go on to create a smarter, healthier, and more equitable world. And we know that this is what they will do because they are now a part of TC's great legacy, and it is in TC's DNA to find meaningful solutions to the most difficult problems. I have a request for each of you sitting here tonight. If you are moved or if you are inspired by what you hear during our program, I ask that you make a gift to the TC Fund this evening. Our students and our faculty are deserving of your support, and every gift counts, and they are all counting on each of you. I'd like to take a moment now to recognize and thank those donors who are here with us this evening. Your leadership support and your consistent support every year is not just incredibly generous, but has an especially meaningful impact. Your TC Fund gift supports the great scholarship that leads to meaningful and long-term change. Our communities and our classrooms are stronger because of each of you. On behalf of everybody at TC, I thank you for your commitment to the college. And now I would like to turn the podium over and begin our formal program for tonight. Please join me in welcoming our host and a great advocate for the TC Fund himself, Provost and Dean of the College, Tom James.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you all for coming tonight and for joining us. And for those who are watching from outside this our living room here, thank you for joining us. It's really a privilege for me in my work to be able to get inside the dreams and the aspirations of faculty and to live with them as they accomplish what they seek to accomplish here. And I can remember meeting Michelle almost 9 years ago when I was making my own transition here. And she had come in a few years before from UCLA, where she got her doctorate. And she really had some big ideas about what she wanted to accomplish. And watching the arc of her work over these years, as she's gone forward and developed the scholarship, which has had a national impact, international impact indeed. And alongside that, the work deep in communities and schools, so that the ideas and the actions were really meshed together. It reminds me a little bit of something someone said to me some years ago about working in this field of education, that you really need to be an amphibian he said. You have to be able to live in more than one environment, like something that can live in water and on land. And I think our best faculty are amphibious in the sense that we live the life of the academy, which is the devotion to research, to deepening insight, to truth, and really generating new knowledge. But at the same time, we're connected to the environments where kids are and where families are living and where there are communities. And we see these things as really working together. And I think there's no better sign of that than the last book of Michelle Knight-Manuel, where she was really talking about the advancement of Black and Latino kids into higher education. And it's a powerful book. It had award-winning book. It had wide readership. I think a lot of attention within education. But at the same time, she was launching a project inside New York City to work in building cultural competency and connection and engagement within the Department of Education, within the culture of schools, so that schools could really engage more deeply those who are aspiring to higher education. So she did both things. She worked in the environment of scholarship, creating new work, as she's done over many years, and she began changing the world around her directly through the schools and the hearts and minds of educators. And I think it's that combination that is especially powerful. I just want to say, echo a little bit what Susan Sherman said earlier. First of all, to thank her and her team for organizing this event, getting us some food we can go to afterwards, and giving us this convivial atmosphere in which to meet together. And also to thank those of you who are in the annual fund, and to tell you, when I speak of faculty, they feel the impact of your continuing devotion to Teachers College. We feel the push as we work forward into the new worlds of scholarship and action that we want to accomplish. And we feel the sense of community with the larger Teachers College, which is all who have experienced this place and want it to thrive and move forward and really have an impact on human beings. So please know that that's deeply felt here. And you're going to hear that from any faculty member that comes in here, that you're so important to us. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Michelle Knight-Manuel. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to give thanks to Provost Tom James for inviting me to be part of the series. I would also like to thank Susan Sherman and her team for organizing tonight. And I want to thank all of you for coming out. It is truly a pleasure to see so many of you who are interested in this topic and making a change in your own respective environments. As we begin, I would like, just by a raise of hands, how many of you were considered first-generation college students? Okay, wow, we have a lot in the room, which is great. I first became interested in this topic as a beginning teacher in Oakland, California. And I was an ESL teacher, an English as a second language teacher is what they called us many years ago. And I worked with students from Cambodia, from Laos, from Vietnam, from El Salvador, from Guatemala, from Mexico. And when we found out that the ESL 5 class that I taught to the 9th grade students did not count as one of the English requirements for the UC system, I was really concerned that students were taking an extra class that would not really enable them to be eligible to enter into that system. And so that's when my intellectual curiosity around college access and what do we need to do to change. And at that time, the students and I advocated with the district to really change that course into one that would enable them to at least have eligibility for the UC system. Okay, there we go. Moving to New York, as Tom James was sharing, I've engaged in several research endeavors around college access and success. And in doing so, I wrote this book called College Ready. And just as the book was coming out, the New York City Department of Education, along with the Soros Foundation and the New York City Mayor's Office, was launching an initiative called the Expanded Success Initiative. And they were concerned about the college readiness rates of many Black and Latino young men. Oh, I don't know why I keep doing that. Okay. And as you look at this particular graph, you can see where their concern comes from. Although in 2012, the high school graduation rate for Black and Latino young men was around 52%, 53% respectively, they were only considered college ready at 14% for Latino young men and 12% for Black young men, according to the standards of the CUNY system. And when we begin to think, what's at the root of these disparities around college readiness? And it is the reality that many Black and Latino young men are receiving inadequate educational opportunities in high school. In addition, we also need to look at teachers' expectations for and visions for students and the impact they have on them, especially when we look at students living in poverty and students of color seem to face lowered expectations and inequitable access to high-quality learning opportunities. So in partnership with the New York City Department of Education, they asked me, based on the findings of the book College Ready, to come in and share with them what did we think were the most important findings from the book, and how could we create professional development for 40 of the schools that they had as part of this initiative. And to be part of this initiative, the school had to be 35% Black or Latino male, 60% free or reduced lunch, a 4-year graduation rate about 65%, and they had to be receiving an A or B on their school progress reports. So for schools that volunteered, we conducted 4 to 8 professional development sessions around college going from a culturally relevant approach. The research thus far has been a 3-year study, and the members of the New York City Department of Education collected the interview data, collected the observations, and TC research students, graduate students, sat in and took notes on the observations and collected written documentation. So when we begin to think about creating a culturally relevant college-going culture, I want us to first begin to think about how we successfully shift our paradigms. How do we think about conventional ways of college going, and what are some new paradigms we need to be thinking about in order to make college readiness and success a part of Black and Latino young men's lives? So the 3 areas I'm just going to give a slice of the findings for tonight are shared vision, shared responsibility, and shared accountability. So when we think about shared vision, we have to think about the conventional paradigm where we have one college counselor for at least 400 students. And in large urban districts, we're thinking about 1 to 700 students. So you can begin to see inadequate resources for Black and Latino young youth in schools when we think about the ways in which 400 students are trying to access one college-going counselor to go to college. So we have to shift that paradigm of the college counselor is the only one in the environment who is responsible for supporting the college-going of our students. And we have to begin to think about how does everyone in the school culture begin to have a shared vision around what that might look like. And so as we began these workshops, some of the participants began to say, like, it is the job of everyone in the school to establish a college-going culture, not just the guidance counselors or the AP or whoever deals with specific college-going stuff. It's really the job of everyone. We also conducted these professional development sessions where the entire school could come. And so one of the support staff said, yes, everyone has to be involved. It has to be from all staff members, from the secretary to the security people, everyone just talking about having to understand what this means. You know, the college-going culture. And so what do we mean when we think about a college-going culture? And we want to talk about shared responsibility. And when we think about shared responsibility within this college-going culture, we want to think about 2 different types of assessments. We want to think about the assessment that has to deal with the actual 9 college-going elements within a school district, within a school culture, And then we also want to think about what it means to be a culturally competent educator in our increasingly diverse schools. And so from McClafferty, McDonough, and Nunez, we get these 9 interrelated elements around college going. It has to do with college talk, the kind of talk that we see in the environment, the clear expectations that students are receiving, what are the information and resources that are available within the school, how do we think of a comprehensive counseling model and not just one sole counselor in the school? What do we need to think differently about the testing and curriculum, faculty involvement, family involvement, college partnerships, and the articulation of the smooth and seamless transition from high school to college? And when we begin to think about that, we asked them to complete this rubric. And the rubric was 1 to 4 for each category. And 1 meant that you hadn't even started really bringing college talk and clear expectations into your environment. A 2 meant you had begun a little bit. A 3 meant it was really becoming embedded within your school culture. And a 4 meant that anybody on the outside could come in, you could show it off, and everybody would know immediately this college-going element is here in this culture. And while we started the conversation, everybody thought that they had a strong college-going culture. As soon as the assessment was completed and we began the discussion, it became very clear that everyone felt that they were really all over the place. So there was really none of those elements really received a 4 from the whole faculty at any of the schools that we were working in. And some schools had 1 in some of the categories, but most of the schools were going back and forth on whether they really had started to embed some of these elements, or was it really deeply embedded within the school culture? And so as we finished the discussion, some of them were talking about in the interviews. One quote was, "It was eye-opening for us to have a conversation and say, wow, I thought we were doing all we could do, but we were really not, and now what can we do?" Another person said, "Although I think we're getting there, I think maybe this is the first year that we really can go whole hog into doing this." And then a third quote from someone who said, "It helps you think about things that you do or that you say, and that really made me conscious of what's going on in school and even just in the surroundings." So it was very clear after they took this assessment that they knew they had work to do and how could they move forward on some more successful approaches to thinking about what it might mean for them to be a culturally relevant college-going culture. And the reason why we want to talk about culturally relevant college-going culture, because we have to think about the society we live in today. We have to think about specifically the society that many of our Black and Latino young men are living in today. And whether or not we agree with the Black Lives Movement, whether or not we agree with immigration deportation, whether or not we agree with what's happening in society around religion and race and ethnicity, we have to understand it still is in play. We have to understand that our students are still grappling with it and negotiating it. And so we want to think about what kind of framework enables us to have those kinds of conversations where we can respectfully disagree, but really think about what kinds of conversations do we need to be having that really support Black and Latino young men around the strengths that they bring to school. And when we do that, we want to look at the framework that Gloria Ladson-Billings has brought us, looking at student learning and achievement, cultural competence, and social political awareness. And so when we do this, we have to say, what enables us to really have these dialogues and conversations about race and ethnicity and achievement? And one of the things that several of the people said was, you know, I've been in this school for 15 years, and I really have never sat down with other teachers and had these conversations. So you can imagine if they haven't had the conversation, how can you have the conversation with Black and Latino young men about what is going on with them? And so what I want you to think about just for a minute, just in your own mind, you don't have to say anything out loud or share with anybody, usually we do in the workshop, but I just want you to think for a minute. What is one stereotype around race and ethnicity in your culture that you have to negotiate? One stereotype that you have to negotiate. Okay. So at one of the schools, several of the teachers said, you know, we're always talking about stereotypes about Black and Latino young men, but what about the stereotypes they might have of us as being white and Jewish and rich? And we're not Jewish and we're not rich, but they think we're all white, Jewish, and rich. So I said, have you ever had a conversation with them about this stereotype and what that might mean? And they said, no. And I said, okay, so why do you think you haven't had a conversation with them about a stereotype that they have about you? And they realized they just weren't comfortable. They never talked about it, even though they're feeling it. And so what we did in the conversation was ask them to really think about the stereotypes that they thought people had of them. How would they begin to share out with their students? And then I also wanted them to go a step further and think about how they felt about that particular stereotype about them that wasn't true. And I wanted them to think about what that meant for their students who knew or felt that people in the school had stereotypes about them that they were not college bound. And so then we could begin to think about how can they go back and have those conversations with students around race and culture and achievement and what was happening with them. So when we think about culturally relevant in terms of a college-going culture, we want to emphasize the importance of school-level and classroom interactions that attend to and incorporate students' interests, their cultural backgrounds and histories as assets in the learning environment, especially in tandem with the 9 elements of a college-going culture. So what does this really mean for practice when we think about shared accountability and creating a college-going culture? So one of the first things I want to talk about is teacher beliefs and attitudes. And that's why I talked about in the very beginning. It's about mind shifts and paradigm shifts that we need to have. And so one of the participants said, in terms of raised expectations that he now had of Black and Latino young men, he said, you know, it, meaning the PD, really tweaked a lot of my thinking in terms of ways in which we can help young men that have been traditionally left outside of academic achievement. Even rethinking things I might have said because they may have been more detrimental than beneficial. I should be demanding greatness, not demanding obedience. So we really want to talk about what's the difference between greatness and obedience. And how does that shift the way we might enact our practices if we're really looking and having high expectations of greatness for our young men? So another act of accountability that we want to think about has to do with the types of college talk that we take place. And this is where we want to talk about, you can have the college talk, but where's the support behind the college talk? So one of the participants says, there was a kid who I would always say, I think he'd be a great attorney. And I'd call him Esquire. And we'd play around in the hallways. But then I thought, I really need to have a conversation with him. And just last week I did. And we talked about what directions he's going to go in and what does he need to do to get there. So many times we can have aspirations, and our students can have aspirations to be a lawyer, and we even think from their debating skills that maybe they could be a lawyer. But if we're really not giving them the information of what they need to be able to succeed in a college, to become a lawyer, then we're really not providing them the scaffolding that they need to actually access those particular careers. When we also think about social political awareness, one of the things we also want to think about and ask our teachers to think about, and then have them ask their students to think about, and especially when you think about the climate now and all the campus unrest that's taking place around, how our college campus is really meeting the needs of diverse student populations. So one of the persons in the study said, let's look at that population on campus. Do you think that would be a good fit for you? What can you bring to the college? What do you think some of your challenges will be? So many times when students would go on college campus visits, you know, is to see different aspects of the school, but in reality, a college may want you and really do the hard push to get you to come, but then you have to ask what supports are in place at the college level to really support them as well. And one of the things we ask our students now when you're out on a tour, to not only ask how many Black or Latino young males are going to this school, to also ask the question, how many of them are graduating? Because that's a different story. You may have access, but if we're talking about success and getting through, we really want to look at the colleges our students are going to and whether those campuses are really set up to support Black and Latino young men in succeeding. We also want to think curriculum was one of the areas about on the 9 college-going elements. And it may seem, sometimes things seem very common sense, but sometimes we overlook them because maybe they seem so common sense. So one of the things that happened around the curriculum after thinking about culturally relevant education was a person said, you know, on our English team, we were actually going very female-centered. The boys weren't really interested, and when the curriculum was designed, no one was really looking at the mixes of gender. So we went back and added a couple pieces of literature that the boys would be into. It was a total different response. You know the boys, they want to feel like they connect to the reading. So when we look at disengagement of our students, and specifically our Black and Latino young men, we want to think about how is that curriculum really speaking to their interests? How is it a rigorous curriculum that builds on their interests and then takes them to where you want them to go in terms of the curriculum, whether it's in math or in science or English or social studies? So one of the things is really they took time to do was to go back and look over their lesson plans and really see, based on these college indicators around culturally relevant education, did they really have it as part of their lesson plan or not? And if they didn't, then they were like, okay, this is a way that I can move on my lesson plan to begin incorporating the ways in which I am supporting their identities within the curriculum. This is a way to begin to talk about inequities within society that they're feeling and want to address. And so we want to think about another issue that comes up when we think about shared accountability and old conventional models. Old conventional models usually seem to say 11th and 12th grade, that when you're thinking about 11th and 12th grade, that's where the focus and emphasis in the school culture should be in terms of getting to college. But many of you are well aware 11th and 12th grade is really, really late, and we're missing them. And so research shows that early exposure is one of the most important ways that we can begin the college-going process with our students. And so those schools who were 6 to 12 in the study, we also asked them to think about the 6th graders who went on college visits, as well as the 11th and 12th graders. And although it's, once again, it seems like a commonplace, very maybe common sense shift we can make, but in actuality, for people to really begin to think as early as possible, how do we expose students who may have never been on a college campus to a college campus? How do we enable them to see that they belong? I don't know how many of you might have seen, there's a video out called I Am Harvard, and there's a video from UCLA. And all those students of color and first-generation students are saying how they didn't feel that they belonged there. They didn't feel like they belonged on a college campus. And so we want to say, what are we doing in the high school cultures that don't enable our students to feel like they belong in higher ed, they belong in a place like TC? You know, and so we have to think about what can a college campus visit do? And in relationship to that college campus visit, how do we enable them to see other aspects of their culture? So one of the trips that a school decided to take down to the historically Black colleges down in Baltimore, they wanted to go to Morgan State. And what they decided in doing that trip, that they also wanted to go to the National Great Blacks Wax Museum. They wanted them to see the ways in which Blacks have contributed to society. And they thought that this was a college that even though it was out of state, the tuition was still reasonable, it was still close to home. They actually offered bachelor's through doctorate, so you can think about supporting students through the whole pipeline. And they were also known for preparing first-generation college students and welcomed ESL students. And the participants said this was really perfect for our student body. However, without taking that trip, many of our students don't see that there are other colleges outside of New York that may be a better fit for them based on their academic interests, as well as their cultural and social interests as well. So in order to challenge these disparities that I was sharing with you on that third PowerPoint, the graph of 14% of Latino males being college ready and 12% of Black males being college ready, I hope that you can begin to see from this presentation the ways in which we can begin to shift paradigms within a high school college-going culture, the ways in which we can support students' cultural identities so they can also see them as college-going identities as well. And we want to see the ways in which we change the curriculum, change the way we all see ourselves as part of that college-going culture to support Black and Latino young students. As we move along, I want to invite two of the graduate students who worked on this particular study over the years, and they're going to also share some of their experiences working on this particular research project.
Hi, I'm Denzel Street, and I'm a doctoral student. So as a PhD student, two of the things that we've focused on is getting the dissertation done, which thankfully I did today. Thanks. And getting published. Very little attention is placed on how do you give back? How do you impact society? And my work with Michelle has helped me in that third component. Started off taking a class on culturally responsive research, which led to a paper which won an AARA award, and then I was like, there must be more. So I said, is there anything I can help with? She's like, oh, I'm doing this project with New York City Public Schools on Black and Latino males. And I'm like, I'm a Black man, I could help somehow. So we trekked weekly to 4 or 5 boroughs, and it was interesting in seeing how the research, which has been in existence for 20 years, you had teachers with master's degrees teaching for 30 years, 10 years, and they've never been exposed to some of this research. And also interesting was the fact that as we talked to the teachers about talking about college with their students, we found that BMCC came up a lot. It was the minimum a teacher thought they can do for their students. If I can get him into the BMCC, I've done a good job. And then I had to think of my role in the professional development sessions as, here you have a Black man who's attending Teachers College. How am I changing that paradigm of where their students can reach? So in taking the research from the classroom into the field, and not just lecturing to the teachers as to, here's this idea, we think it may work, but actually seeing lives changed, I think has been a great impact, both on me as a scholar, but as well knowing that somewhere along the line, there's this one teacher who listened to what we discussed, who saw me as someone who achieved, who can reach their students, saw a student in me, and knowing that that could inspire someone has made a difference. And I would like that more students get that opportunity to move beyond the dissertation and that publishing that article to get you the dream faculty posting, and more into how can we make a difference in the lives of the people in our city. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laura Vernikoff. I'm a 5th-year doctoral student here in curriculum and teaching. And in my first full-time year here, I was fortunate enough to join this research team. Up until that point, my experience with research had really just been reading other people's research in my classes. And in that research that I read, somebody came up with a vision, they had a plan, they followed a couple of steps, they implemented their plan, they found something out, and they wrote it up. It was very neat, it was very researcher-directed. And when I joined this team, I discovered that behind every reported decision that a researcher had made, there were usually about 1,000 other little decisions they had made. So it was a lot messier than I expected. Another thing I discovered joining this team, which Denzel addressed a bit, and which I really appreciated, is that not all research had to be researcher-directed and for the purpose of a researcher publishing, becoming professor, advancing their agenda, but there was also ways to do research that could directly benefit participants, not just benefit people down the line who read your work, but who benefited the people that you were researching for and with. So once I discovered that research was a lot more complicated than I thought, I was fortunate to have the support of this research team. And as Dr. Knight-Manuel talked about in her talk, one thing that was really great about this research team was it was a culturally relevant research team. We had a shared vision. As I said, it wasn't just about us publishing papers. It was about improving equity in New York City. It was about improving college going for Black and Latino young men in New York City. We had shared responsibility, and we had shared accountability. We were all working on this project, and we were all helping each other out with the project. And so for me as a novice researcher, it was really, really helpful to have my more experienced peers and my professors working with me on this shared vision. And so in this way, I learned that, okay, research isn't just a matter of learning the 5 steps to make it right, or even learning the 5,000 steps to make it right, but it's a series of decisions you're making, and every decision influences the outcome in some way. But it's a complicated process, and so learning that process with my peers was really helpful. Practically speaking, I also got to learn all those nitty-gritty things that are a little bit more a matter of following steps, like applying for IRB approval, collecting data, analyzing data. Again, I got to see my peers and my professors conducting interviews, for example. How did they hold themselves? How close to the participant did they sit? All those 5,000 decisions that happen behind every published ones. And now in my 5th year, I'm working on my own dissertation. I hope that maybe next year I'll be able to say I just turned mine in also. Not yet. But this experience has really put me in a position where I'm able to start thinking through all these steps, and in particular, thinking through how I can benefit not just people who read my work down the line, but the participants that I'm working with directly right now on this project. So it's been a very valuable experience for me.
Hi, my name is Mike Reichgott. I'm faculty at Albert Einstein College of Medicine and very much involved with the admissions process at the far end of the education spectrum. And I was particularly interested in your comments about what I have written down here as the way people react to the expectations that they have about themselves, their own stereotypes, and how it influences the performance, particularly of minority students. We see students who arguably should have excellent academic performance because they went to a good high school and they went to a good college, and they don't. And when we look at them for admission to medical school, and we're very interested in having more minority representation in medical school, we're frustrated by the lack of evident academic performance. And the argument that we hear is, I think, the I am Harvard argument. I didn't feel like I belonged here, and therefore I couldn't perform. So how do we break that cycle?
I do think one of the important ways we need to think about is, how are we sending messages to people, to students, that they do belong? And in terms of sending those messages, we want to think about when they come on campus. Are there ways that they feel welcomed on this campus, that there is a curriculum on this campus that speaks to if they want to do work in the community? Are there programs on that campus that really speak to what it means to do work around medical issues that are important to the community? I think we also have to start very early in saying that, it's important that you can go anywhere. And once we begin to show you the requirements, we're going to help support you to have those requirements. And so when we go to campuses, we ask people when they come back to really look at what does that campus say that they need in terms of academic requirements? And what do you need to start doing now so that you know that you do belong on this campus? You do have the academic requirements to be on this campus. So I think it's how we message to students that they belong, that this place is for them, that when they come on this campus, that we want you here. But not just that we want you here because we want the physical presence of your body, but we really want the ideas that you bring. We really want to support those ideas. We really want to support you to be the best medical doctor you can possibly be. And that may be changing the curriculum and shifting the curriculum a bit. And that may take a little bit more work to do. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
My name is Paula Rosen. I'm a graduate of this wonderful, wonderful institution. And I got my master's and doctoral degree here, and then I went on to become a professor at CUNY. But now, for the last 20 years, I've been a journalist and running my own education newspaper. And I had about 5 questions, but I'll taper it down. I spoke to a young man on the Rockefeller University campus who was a graduate of Princeton and was a postdoc at Rockefeller U. And one of the things that he said to me, which stuck with me the last several years, was that nobody at Princeton really reached out to me. None of the professors seemed to care about me. And here at Rockefeller, I am being mentored. So I wondered if you could speak to the role of mentoring, which, by the way, John King, who's the current Secretary of Education and went here, Yale, and then came to Teachers College, said to me, and he's a friend of mine, my fourth grade teacher saved my life. My father died, my mother died when I was in that period of my life, and that's what my fourth grade teacher did. So learning and teaching is one thing. Mentoring is so important. Could you speak to that, please?
Yes, thank you for that question. I totally agree that mentorship is absolutely needed at every level of the pre-K through 20 spectrum, especially for first-generation students who may not have access to the cultural norms of a particular institution. And so I appreciate what you're saying about that no one reached out to me. And I asked my students it was last semester, about how did they join a program at TC? Like, why did they choose TC as part of a focus group we were doing in class? And one person said one of his professors reached out to him and brought him back. He was a master's student and said, you need to be in the doctoral program. And do you know, I thanked that student because what I did is I had 2 Latina young women in one of my classes, and I talked with them and I said, when you're ready, you know, whenever you feel that you're ready to move on to a doctoral program, I want you to come back and talk to me. And I want you to know, I think you can do a doctoral program, but I'll wait for you to let me know you're ready. Both of them emailed me and thanked me and said no one has ever told them that they are ready to do a doctoral program. And so that notion that we need to reach out when we see students in our program and not just take it for granted, like, oh, they're here, of course they think they can go on, but that we need to do some reaching out. So that is one part of mentorship. I think another part of mentorship, as a graduate student, I took a course at another college at USC. Some people think UCLA and USC are rivals, but I took a course at USC from Bill Tierney. And this is a matter of belonging too. What he did was, I was very quiet in class because I tended to be a quiet student. But he sent me an email and he told me, your voice is needed in class. I never forgot that. When I became a professor, he's not my professor, mind you, he sent me an email and said, you need to be looking into the Spencer postdoc. Have you thought about that? So it's not, sometimes people are concerned about mentoring taking up a lot of time, but we also want to think about there's multiple mentoring models. And of those mentoring models is that notion of how do we reach out? How do we send an email? How do we let people know they belong in the class? How do we let them know their voice is really important to us here at TC or wherever they're at? And so in hitting the notion of a multiple mentor model, I learned that, you know, one professor may be really good around teaching. And that may be the professor you go because they have these great pedagogical strategies and you really want to learn from them in terms of the pedagogy. Another person may be this most fantastic researcher. You want to go learn about research maybe from that person. Sometimes we think one person has to be everything in terms of the mentor. But in terms of thinking about multiple mentor models, we really want to think about who can we go to that can help us. It doesn't reside in one person. I'm also constantly thinking about that belonging question, and it's haunting me in a good way. So I also want to think about the ways in which an institution lets you know that you belong. I know there are several other professors in this room, including myself, that Tom James was very on top of it when other institutions were willing to want to have us. But Tom James, I remember him telling me, no, you can do good work here, Michelle. You know, stay here. You are just really beginning that trajectory of the work that I'm beginning to see. He had a vision that maybe I didn't yet have. And so I want to think about the fact that sometimes our mentors see things in us that we don't always necessarily see. And we want to think about the ways that they enable us to see ourselves in a greater light in the work that we can do. Thank you.
Greetings. Rebecca Martin, class of 1980. Right. You're all supposed to say I don't look that old. Okay, come on. Thank you. All right. But again, just a couple of quick points. Number one, yes, you're right, because even in my brief time on the planet, I've been told I was aiming too high and you can't be a science teacher and black people don't do that and all kinds of ignorant comments. But you have to be strong enough to get through it. Right. And I told my counselees as a guidance counselor for many years that there are two types of people. You have bridge builders and you have gatekeepers. And once you identify who is a gatekeeper, you have to either go around, go over, go under, but just get around and do what you need to do. In terms of the graduate students here, I just had a question in terms of, it seems like you're interacting a lot with teachers in this quest for curriculum that is culturally relevant, which is great. But in the real world, anytime you talk curriculum, you are now talking Board of Ed, you are now talking superintendents, you are now looking at building principals who have to buy into this to really set aside the time and the space for this change to take place, be it a staff development after school or have a half day and let the kids come in later. You have to give life to the dream. And last but not least, I was an undergraduate HEOP student. And one of the things that helped me feel a part of it was traveling kind of with a cohort of people that I kind of knew and we could study together. And yes, I got tutored in physics because I was getting a B and I wanted an A. But it was good to know that once I got through that, I was now being paid to tutor organic chemistry. So now you're helping me economically because the medical students who are not achieving, I would ask you, are they working on the side? What's going on at home? You know, is money an issue? They're not people in a vacuum. There are things going on in their lives where, you know, they'll disappear to help Aunt Tilly, or maybe they lost that loan that you don't know about because nobody ever asked to find out what happened. Okay?
Thank you. You're welcome. I do want to say, I agree with you in terms of the schools that I think were successful in terms of thinking about this culturally relevant college-going culture did have leadership that signed on. And so those were the ones who volunteered their schools and wanted them to be a part of this professional development.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is John Yaseen, and I'm an alumnus of the old applied linguistics course. Before Arthur Levine came in, they did the reorganization when Clifford Hill and Jordan Clifton and Franklin Horowitz and those people were there. My doctorate is from here, and my master's is from the Kennedy School at Harvard, where I was doing the politics of language. And undergraduate school is from Hayward, you know, Cal State Hayward, you know the area. Yeah, because I preceded. I want to say that, get that out first. It's important. You'll know why in a minute. Now I'm going to ask my question, and I'm going to tell you why I asked the question.
Okay.
I was born in Birmingham, Alabama. And when I was 9, my parents left because they got tired of the Ku Klux Klan parading through our community. And my mother's 96 years old now, and if she were here, it's on the West Coast, California, but if she were here, she would tell you, well, if you asked her, well, why did you go to San Francisco? She said, well, that's where the train stopped. And that's literally what they were thinking at that time, right? Now, my first 3 years, my question is about the students being grounded in the knowledge of their own cultures, etc., as children. And I think that makes all the difference in the world. I've been thinking about that. One of the reasons is because I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education. It's an online journal that comes out weekly. Well, last week there was a study that came out of Stanford School of Education where they found that students who had done the ethnic studies, the African American students and Latino students who had done ethnic studies courses in high school, they were the better students when they got to college. They were going to their classes and they were achieving. And I think it's because they had that knowledge, a knowledge about themselves early on. And that's what my question is about. Why I want to pose of you, if you're beginning to expose people to the people you're working with, to the reason. For the reasons that they have to do that type of thing early on. And relative to myself, I'll tell you, because when I went to school, In Birmingham, there was no kindergarten. When you were 6, you went to school. And my parents left, I said, when I was in 3rd grade, but at the end of 3rd grade. But in 3rd grade, I had a teacher whose name was Miss Hill, and that's my mother's maiden name. And I was trying to figure out if she was a member of the family or not. But our kids, you're seen and you're not heard. So I did not ask that question. But what Miss Hill did for me, and I guess she had done it for my sister, was ahead of me, was that when we got the arithmetic books, right? She said, well, you look over, if I assign this page 15 to you, you work those problems. And we had to do them all longhand. And she had wanted to see the work. But after you work that problem, she said, okay, and then you look in the back of the book on this such and such a page and you check the answers. If the answers are wrong, then you rework that problem until you get it correct, right? Now, at some point, it clicked in my mind, I'm sure not in this sophisticated language, that, I have to be responsible for my own learning. That was 3rd grade. And if you go back and look at the literature, that's where they say they lose most African American and Latino boys around that time. So I'm wondering what that connection is in terms of not understanding that they have to take responsible for their own learning at some point. Because that's what got me through. I went to, I don't know if you know the school in San Francisco, I went to Washington High School on 32nd and Gary, out near the beach. It was one of the academic schools.
Okay.
I didn't have a choice. Because they didn't, when we went there, my sister and I got on the highest track, they didn't care if you were orange with purple polka dots, you wouldn't do that work. And we did it. Right. So that's why I'm asking you in terms of understanding that knowledge of self and being grounded in that, because that was the beginning for me, and also the activities that we did in the community, from my family. That's one thing. And the other thing is in terms of students understanding the rigor of the academy. And the reason I'm asking you this, I want to know if you're talking to people about that. And the reason I'm asking you this is because there's a young man who is, I think he's working for the president now, but he was the professor of education at Howard, Ivory Tolson. I don't know if any of you know the name, but but for 3 years, Ivory had a conference on Capitol Hill about educating African American males. And the title of the conference was Breaking Barriers. And at one of the sessions, there was a man who stood up, African American man who stood up and said that his son was now a freshman at Michigan State, and the son came home after the first semester and said to his dad that he had told him to go to school, go to school, go to school. And he went to school, went to school, went to school. He's now at Michigan State, and he said the one thing that he never understood was how rigorous it would be. It was just about getting in there and how rigorous it would be. So I'm wondering if you're working with people in that area, see if you could comment on those two. And I thank everybody for indulging me.
Thank you. I thank you for bringing up the question of the role of the student. So tonight we talk primarily about the role of teachers, administrators, counselors, and support staff. But most certainly when we're thinking about the whole school culture, we're thinking about family, we're thinking about the student, we're thinking about community-based organizations, we're thinking about the role of major stakeholders who are concerned about our youth. So of course students do have their own roles in terms of engaging in the learning process. I'm trying to remember the second question now. Had to do with, rigor. Absolutely. I mean, in terms of college access, we talk about the rigor and relevance of the curriculum. And we're talking about rigor and relevance that enable them to have the requirements to get into a range of post-secondary institutions. So absolutely, rigor and relevance go together in terms of the curriculum.
I have a very succinct exchange with Michelle and Dean James. At the outset, Michelle, you asked us to speak of those who were first generation higher education. And then you went to describe, discuss, explain your research. And you introduced the 9 interrelated college-going elements. And one of the things that struck me was that you included the family, and you also included school lunch programs 60%. And then you talked about greatness and being obedient. Explain, discuss, interact with me how you foresee students of color, African American descent, and Latinos in the school leaving process when many of them, I've done research on my own and presented it, many of them are not graduating on time. So that's a major in my findings in them not getting into the college of their choice. So if they're not graduating on time, what would you suggest, explain, implement to get them to be graduates on time, including that, the family, and that's a critical piece.
Right.
Okay.
So I think we want to think about where does the disengagement take place and why students aren't graduating on time. And part of that disengagement takes place when they don't see any connections to themselves in the curriculum. When we were talking about the young men not seeing themselves in the English reading curriculum. So when we talk about why students aren't graduating on time, part of it has to deal with the fact that they're disengaged from the curriculum. So we want to think about the ways in which the curriculum does need to shift and change to better serve and meet their needs. When we think about the role of the family, one of the things that happens, a lot of, you hear a lot of comments, messages that Black and Latino parents don't care. Well, in actuality, if you ask students, they will say their mom and dads do care very much that they get an education. So I think sometimes there's this mixed message in society that Black and Latino parents don't care, won't do what is necessary to really support their children. And in reality, they're supporting them in the best ways that they can. So we want to think about ways when we think about traditional notions, it's once again shifting that paradigm. We think that parents always have to come to the school to show that they care about their child's education. But in reality, many of our parents are working 2 and 3 jobs. So to ask them to come up to the campus is really unrealistic in today's society. So we have to think of other ways that we acknowledge that parents and community members and family members are involved. So that's why I look to community-based organizations and the ways in which we see they put on college fairs or the ways in which they support different programs for our students and join with families in supporting students after-school programs. So I really think that family are integral to the process, but we want to rethink what that really means in the college-going process.
And I'd like to thank Dean James for having this wonderful evening and for being an alumni and being invited.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Lily Kumar. I graduated from this wonderful teachers college in administration. It's leadership now. I have another perspective of the educational system. I taught in, and I'm going to be brief, I taught in an urban system, and we had a lot of problems. And I think the main theme that I'm emerging here or encouraging is relationships. Yes. We have to have relationships with these students. Yes. We have to sit down and ask them, what are your weaknesses? What are your strengths? What areas are you interested in? And we have to develop what their interest are, you know, and we have to motivate them to do well. And this is one of the ways that we can do this. And many of the instructors, no wonder they feel as if they don't belong, because there is no communication. You must, in anything, I did my research in Puerto Rico, and it was just wonderful, wonderful. You know, the teachers really love those students, and they did very, very well. But many teachers won't go to Puerto Rico because they don't pay any money. The salary is very, very low. But you had this interaction between the teachers and the students. And I think that we must carry on this. We have to motivate these students. If they have come from a poor background, we have to help them. And we have to tell them they can do anything they want to do, and they can be anything they want to be in the United States of America.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Barbara Morris-George, and I taught at the elementary school, the middle school, and the high school level. And I love the idea of embracing the college-going culture, But as based upon my personal experience, I am concerned that are we really looking at education from the womb to the end of college? We want to get these kids in college, but are we doing something at the pre-K, kindergarten, first, second, and third grade level to give them the skills that they need in reading, writing, and math? And if we are, maybe you can share some things that are being done for us.
I just want to share that the focus on the talk was specifically 6th through 12th and 9th through 12th because of where the research was taking place. However, in terms of the larger, broader picture of college access and success, we do have to start at pre-K. We have to start sharing those messages once again that college is for you. We have to, you see, even in my niece is 2 years old, but you see they have a day where the teachers where they went to school. I mean, it seems small, but once again, these visual images along the way that say college is for you, you belong. To begin, once again, thinking about the different types of careers that students may be interested in. And so when they think about the firemen and they think about the policemen and think about those different jobs at the elementary level, once again, are we saying to them, having them understand in the way that we can at that particular level, like these are jobs that you can have, but today, those jobs require some post-secondary education. Like those jobs just don't come after high school, and really to succeed and advance in those particular jobs, you have to have post-secondary education. So there are ways to incorporate from pre-K through 16. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. The earlier we start, the better it is for our students.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have had some wonderful and illuminating minutes together. The bartender is ready. The food is laid out, and there's another bar on this side, and we don't have to stop talking. But now we're going to thank Michelle, and we'll gravitate to the next.